She was called too ugly to marry by everyone who knew her, their cruel words becoming the prison of her existence. The whispers followed her through life like shadows, until that fateful day when the mountain man, untouched by society's poison, saw what no one else could see. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to the channel and comment where you're watching from. The lanterns of Hollowmere swayed gently in the spring breeze, casting long shadows across the village square where the annual spring mating dance had commenced. Fiddle music filled the air with lively tunes as young men approached maidens with colorful ribbons in hand. Each ribbon offered was a sacred gesture in their tradition, a promise of courtship for the coming year. Ilara stood at the edge of the gathering, her hands clasped tightly together, trying to appear smaller than she already was. Look at her, waiting as if someone might actually choose her this year. A voice whispered loudly enough for her to hear. Laughter rippled through a group of village girls, their ribbons already collected from eager suitors. Ilara kept her gaze fixed on the ground, counting the stones beneath her feet rather than meeting the mocking glances thrown her way. She had known what would happen tonight. The same thing that happened every year since she came of age. No ribbons would be offered to the plain-faced daughter of a simple family. The rejection stung no less for being expected. Perhaps if she wore a mask, another voice suggested, triggering another round of cruel laughter. The public humiliation burned through her like fire, made worse by the festive atmosphere that surrounded her loneliness. A hush suddenly fell over the crowd as the music faltered. In that moment of unexpected silence, heavy footsteps approached from the edge of the square. Villagers parted, revealing Garrick Holt making his way through the crowd. The mountain man rarely came to village gatherings, preferring the solitude of his hut high above Hollowmere. His large frame moved awkwardly among the villagers, his rough-spun clothes standing out against the festival attire. When he stopped before Ilara, his face flushed crimson in the lantern light. His hands trembled visibly as he cleared his throat. "If no one asks her," Garrick announced, his voice wavering, yet carrying across the now silent square, "then I will. I ask her first." Ilara's head snapped up, her eyes wide with disbelief as she stared at the man before her. The mountain dweller stood rigid, as though bracing himself against the weight of every stare. Elder Joran's mouth hung open in shock, while nearby Thane the blacksmith narrowed his eyes at the unexpected declaration. The crowd remained frozen, processing the unprecedented scene. Garrick Holt, the virgin mountain man who spoke to bees more than people, had just upended years of tradition with 5 simple words. Ilara's humiliation transformed in an instant into something else entirely, the village's greatest scandal. As she stood there, unable to speak or move, she realized that whatever happened next, nothing in Hollowmere would ever be the same again. The whispers began before the last fiddle note faded. Hollowmere was a village that thrived on gossip, and Garrick Holt's unexpected gesture had given them enough to last until harvest. "Did you see his face? Red as a beet," Marin hissed to a circle of women as they extinguished the lanterns. "He only asked my sister to humiliate her further." Her words carried weight, as everything concerning family reputation did in Hollowmere. Across the square, 3 men huddled near the cider barrels. "The mountain man's never even courted before," one muttered. "Probably doesn't know what to do with a woman." Their laughter cut through the night air sharp and cruel. Ilara walked home alone, her steps quickening as she passed clusters of villagers who fell silent at her approach. The weight of their stares pressed against her back. Inside her family's modest dwelling, she sat at the edge of her bed, fingers tracing the spot where Garrick's calloused hand had briefly touched hers. Pity or mockery, which would be worse? The question circled her mind like a trapped bird. Meanwhile, Garrick trudged up the mountain trail, cursing himself with every step. The craftsman had spent years avoiding the village gatherings, content with his bees and solitude. What madness had possessed him to step forward tonight? He'd seen the shock on Elder Joran's face, the contempt in Thane's eyes. The blacksmith had looked ready to strike him down where he stood. Inside his hut, surrounded by furs and simple tools, Garrick stoked the hearth fire and tried to calm his racing thoughts. He'd acted on impulse, unable to bear another moment of watching Alara stand alone, enduring the village's cruelty. Now he'd bound himself to tradition, and to her. By morning, Bretta the healer had heard 12 different versions of the night's events. She visited Alara, finding her grinding herbs with unusual force. "People are saying he did it as a jest," Alara said without looking up. Bretta settled beside her. "And what do you believe?" "I don't know." His voice trembled. Alara paused, remembering. "No one who means to mock speaks with such fear." The healer nodded. "Garrick keeps to himself, but he's never been cruel." For 3 days, Alara replayed that moment, his hesitant step forward, the flush creeping up his neck, the way his voice had cracked on the word first. There had been something genuine there, something that resonated in the hollow spaces of her heart where mockery had carved its chambers. Being chosen out of pity stung nearly as much as being ignored. Yet as she lay awake each night, it wasn't shame that kept her from sleep, but curiosity about the man who had dared to break tradition for her sake. The morning dew still clung to the grass as Alara made her way up the narrow mountain trail. 3 days had passed since the spring mating dance. 3 days of avoiding pitying glances and whispered conversations that fell silent when she approached. Her heart pounded with each step toward Garrick Holt's isolated dwelling, a mixture of obligation and curiosity driving her forward despite her apprehension. The path grew steeper, winding through stands of pine and oak. Alara paused to catch her breath, wondering if she should turn back. What would she even say to the mountain man who had caused such a stir? But something pulled her onward, perhaps the memory of his trembling voice cutting through the mockery. Garrick's hut appeared between the trees, smoke curling from a stone chimney. It was smaller than she'd imagined, built of rough-hewn logs with a sloped roof covered in pine branches. She hesitated at the clearing's edge before approaching the wooden door and knocking softly. The door swung open, revealing Garrick's towering frame. His eyes widened with surprise, a flush spreading across his weathered face. "You came," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Alara nodded, suddenly unable to find words. The mountain man stepped aside, gesturing awkwardly for her to enter his world. The interior was a single room, warmed by a small hearth. Furs lined the walls, keeping out the mountain chill, while simple wooden tools hung from pegs, a life built with his own hands. The air was thick with the scent of pine resin and wood smoke, oddly comforting despite its unfamiliarity. "I don't have visitors," he explained, hurriedly clearing wooden carvings from the only table. "Not ever, really." "I can go if—" "No," he interrupted, then softer. "Please, stay." Garrick moved to a shelf where clay pots were neatly arranged. He selected one, then filled a kettle with water from a wooden bucket. "I have tea," he offered, hanging the kettle over the fire, "and honey from my bees." His hands shook as he worked, revealing a nervousness that matched her own. Alara watched him prepare 2 mismatched cups, noting how carefully he measured the dried leaves. When he handed her the steaming cup, their fingers brushed momentarily. He pulled back as if burned, spilling drops on the earthen floor. "I'm sorry," they both said simultaneously, then fell into awkward silence. The tea was fragrant, sweetened with wild honey that tasted of mountain flowers. They sipped without speaking, the quiet broken only by the crackling fire and distant birdsong. "Thank you," Alara finally said, "for what you did at the dance." He looked up, meeting her eyes for the first time. "I couldn't bear to watch them treat you that way." In the stillness that followed, something shifted between them. A tentative trust, flickering like the hearth flames that cast dancing shadows across the walls of his solitary home. It was fragile, this new understanding, but in that moment, it felt stronger than all the cruel laughter that had followed them both. Summer settled over Hollowmere like a heavy blanket, bringing with it not just sweltering heat, but a feverish intensity to the village gossip. In the fields, men wiped sweat from their brows and snickered about Garrick Holt's inexperience with women. They exchanged knowing glances, wondering aloud what a mountain man could possibly know about courting, let alone satisfying a wife. "Poor fool probably thinks holding hands makes babies," one farmer joked, earning roars of laughter from his companions. At the village well, women gathered with their wooden buckets, voices dropping to hushed tones whenever Ilara passed by. The craftsman's daughter, barely 16, didn't bother to lower her voice when she declared that only desperation would drive someone to accept pity instead of love. Her words stung Ilara like nettles, each syllable leaving invisible welts on her heart. Even the market became a gauntlet of whispers and stares. Ilara kept her eyes fixed on the ground, counting each step as if it might somehow shield her from the judgment pressing in from all sides. The baker's wife refused to serve her directly, sliding the loaf of bread across the counter without meeting her gaze. One afternoon, a gentle knock interrupted Ilara's solitude. Breda stood at the threshold, her weathered hands carrying a small basket of dried herbs. The healer's eyes crinkled with kindness as she stepped inside without waiting for an invitation. "They say the loudest voices often carry the emptiest thoughts," Breda said, placing the herbs on the table. She took Ilara's hands in her own. "I've seen barren fields bloom after the harshest winters. Compassion can transform even the most unyielding soil." Ilara fought back tears. But what if his compassion is just pity? "The mountain man may be inexperienced, but his heart speaks true," the healer replied. "I've watched him at market. His eyes follow you with wonder, not obligation." That evening, Marin stormed into their shared room, her face tight with anger. Ilara's sister threw her shawl onto the bed with such force that dust motes scattered in the fading light. "Do you have any idea what they're saying about our family now?" she hissed. "Mother can barely show her face at the loom house. Father drinks alone because no man will share his table." "I didn't ask for Garrick to choose me," Ilara whispered. "And yet you continue this farce," Marin spat. "Your selfishness will drag us all further into shame. Is that what you want?" Ilara turned away, unable to answer. Outside, crickets began their evening chorus, indifferent to human concerns. She pressed her palm against the cool window glass, gazing toward the distant mountains where Garrick's hut stood. Between the cruel whispers of the village and her sister's cold resentment, that remote sanctuary seemed increasingly like her only refuge. The mountain air tasted different than in the village, cleaner, sharper, like freedom itself. Ilara Thornwood followed Garrick Holt's broad back up the winding trail, her breath coming in short puffs as they climbed higher than she'd ever ventured before. The mountain man moved with the ease of someone who belonged to these slopes, pausing occasionally to wait for her. "I thought perhaps you might want to learn," Garrick said, his voice carrying the same tremor it had on the night of the dance. "The mountain provides everything, if you know how to ask." Over the following weeks, Ilara's soft hands grew calloused as Garrick taught her to set rabbit snares with careful loops of twine. The first time she caught something, her triumphant smile made him drop his gaze, a flush creeping up his neck. "You have clever fingers," he murmured, showing her how to skin the catch without tearing the valuable pelt. They spent afternoons stretching hides across wooden frames, rubbing them with mixtures of fat and ash until they became supple. Ilara laughed at her mistakes, the lopsided frames, the holes torn in delicate skins, and was surprised to hear Garrick's low chuckle join hers. "No one gets it right the first time," he assured her, his hands guiding hers with unexpected gentleness. But it was the bees that truly revealed Garrick's heart. He led her to a sunny clearing where 6 carefully tended hives stood like sentinels. Ilara hung back, wary of stings, but the craftsman approached without fear, lifting a hand in greeting, as if the buzzing creatures were old friends. "They won't hurt you," he promised, wrapping her in a protective garment. They know when someone means no harm. As they worked together, checking the hives and clearing debris, Ilara noticed how Garrick would sometimes simply stand, eyes closed, listening to the constant hum. "Don't you collect the honey?" she asked, puzzled. "I take only what I need," he replied. "I keep them mostly for their sound." When she looked confused, he added softly, "The mountain gets quiet. Too quiet sometimes. The bees, they remind me I'm not alone." Something shifted between them that day. Ilara saw past his awkwardness to the soul beneath, a man who found companionship in the steady presence of tiny winged creatures. Each lesson brought new revelations: Garrick's patience when teaching, his unexpected smile when she succeeded, the way his hands steadied when demonstrating a skill. Their conversations grew longer, punctuated by comfortable silences that no longer felt like barriers. By summer's peak, Ilara found herself looking forward to these days on the mountain more than anything else. Away from Holomir's judging eyes, she discovered parts of herself long buried under shame: strength, determination, and a capacity for joy she'd forgotten existed. And Garrick, watching her bloom like a wildflower finding unexpected light, began to stand taller himself. The slam of the cottage door echoed through the small dwelling as Marin stormed in, her face flushed with anger. Ilara looked up from the herb she was bundling, immediately recognizing the storm brewing in her sister's eyes. "How could you?" Marin hissed, pacing across the worn floorboards. "Everyone in the village is laughing at us. The Holt man? The mountain hermit who barely speaks to anyone? Have you no shame at all?" Ilara's fingers trembled slightly as she continued her work. "Garrick has been nothing but kind to me." "Kind?" Her sister spat the word like poison. "Kindness doesn't matter in Hollowmere. Beauty matters. Status matters. Do you think Mother would have wanted to see her daughter reduced to accepting pity from a man who's never even courted before?" The mention of their mother sent a pang through Ilara's chest. She set down the bundle of herbs, facing her sister directly. "What would you have me do? Stand alone at every festival until I wither away? Garrick offered me dignity when no one else would." Marin slammed her palm against the table. "Dignity? You call this dignity? The entire village whispers when I walk by. There goes Marin, sister to the girl who couldn't do better than the mountain man. You're dragging our family name through the mud." Outside, rain began to patter against the thatched roof, matching the tension building inside. Ilara stood, squaring her shoulders. "I won't refuse him, Marin." Her sister's eyes narrowed. "Then you choose him over your own blood? Over everything our parents built in this village?" The weight of tradition and family expectation pressed down on Ilara's shoulders. For a moment, doubt crept in. Was she being selfish? Should she endure loneliness to preserve what little standing her family had left? But then she remembered Breda's words from days earlier, spoken over steaming cups of mint tea. "The village measures worth by what can be seen, child. But true value lies in what remains when beauty fades and strength diminishes." "I'm not choosing him over you," Ilara said quietly. "I'm choosing the chance to be valued for something other than a face I wasn't born with." Marin shook her head, disappointment etched in every line of her face. "You'll regret this when winter comes, and you're trapped on that mountain with a man who doesn't know how to love properly." As her sister stormed out, Ilara stood alone in the silence. Through the small window, she could see the mountain rising in the distance, shrouded in mist. Somewhere up there, Garrick was probably tending his bees, unaware of the storm he had created in her family. She touched the dried flowers hanging from the ceiling beam, a charm for protection that their mother had placed there years ago. "Give me strength," she whispered, torn between the path her heart yearned for and the expectations that had defined her entire life. The first frost dusted the fields of Hollowmere as autumn painted the valley in amber and gold. Women gathered in their homes, weaving baskets from reeds harvested at summer's end, filling them with the bounty of their labor, apples polished to a gleam, grain bundled in cloth, and small jars of preserves. The harvest rite approached, that ancient tradition where a woman's worth was measured by the weight of her basket and the willingness of men to carry it. Ilara Thorne sat by the hearth, her fingers working the reeds with practiced precision despite the trembling in her heart. The basket taking shape beneath her hands was simple but sturdy, much like herself. Nearby, Marin watched with narrowed eyes, her own elaborate creation already finished and displayed prominently on the table. "Elder Joran spoke with me after the morning prayers," Marin said, her voice carefully casual. "He believes your presence at the rite would be disruptive." Ilara's hands stilled. "Disruptive? The sanctity of custom," he said. "Your arrangement with the mountain man mocks our traditions." Marin smoothed her skirt, avoiding her sister's gaze. "Perhaps it would be better if you stayed away." That evening, Breda visited, bringing herbs for tea. The healer's weathered hands cupped Ilara's as she spoke of courage and defiance. "Joran fears what he cannot control," the older woman murmured. "But traditions that cannot bend will eventually break." Word spread through the village like wildfire. By morning, everyone knew Elder Joran had declared Ilara unwelcome at the harvest rite. Some nodded in agreement, relieved to be spared the awkwardness of her presence. Others shifted uncomfortably, uncertain if tradition truly demanded such cruelty. When Garrick descended from his mountain dwelling 3 days later, the whispers followed him through the village square. He strode directly to Thane's forge, his shoulders set with determination. The blacksmith looked up from his anvil, hammer paused mid-strike. "I hear Ilara is forbidden from the harvest rite," Garrick said, his voice carrying across the yard. Thane set down his hammer. "Elder Joran believes it best." "Then Elder Joran is wrong." The mountain man's words hung in the air, shocking those who had gathered to watch. "I will walk beside her. I will carry her basket myself if no other man will." The challenge in his voice was unmistakable. Several villagers exchanged glances, some thoughtful, others disapproving. Thane studied Garrick's face, searching for weakness or doubt, and finding none. "You would defy our oldest traditions?" someone called from the crowd. Garrick turned, scanning the faces around him. "I would honor what they were meant to be, a celebration of harvest, of gratitude, of community. Not a weapon to wound those deemed unworthy." As he walked away, the villagers parted before him, and for the first time, it was not disgust that followed in his wake, but something that might, with time, become respect. The autumn sun cast long shadows across Hollowmere's harvest grounds, as villagers gathered for the sacred rite. Women stood in a crescent formation, each holding baskets woven from reeds and filled with the bounty of their labor. Apples polished to a shine, sheaves of golden grain, and herbs tied with twine. One by one, men approached to claim the baskets of those they deemed worthy, sealing another year of courtship or marriage. Ilara stood at the edge of the formation, her knuckles white against the handle of her basket. She had risen before dawn to select the ripest apples from the orchard and arrange them with sprigs of lavender, a touch Breda had suggested might bring her luck. Yet as the minutes stretched into an hour, her offering remained unclaimed, growing heavier in her trembling arms. "Look how she still hopes," whispered a woman nearby, not bothering to lower her voice, as if any man would choose such plain fruit. The weight of the basket was nothing compared to the burden of shame that pressed down on Ilara's chest. She fixed her gaze on the distant mountains, refusing to let tears fall. Around her, joyful couples paired off, the men proudly carrying their chosen women's baskets toward Elder Joran for blessing. The elder's eyes narrowed when they fell upon Ilara. "Perhaps it would be best if you returned home," he suggested, his tone making it clear this was no suggestion at all. "Your presence disrupts the harmony of our traditions. A collective intake of breath rippled through the gathering as Garrick Holt emerged from the crowd. The mountain man moved with purpose, his broad shoulders squared against the weight of disapproving stares. He stopped before Elara, his calloused hands reaching for her basket. "I would be honored to carry this," Garrick said, his voice low but steady. The basket transferred from her arms to his, and something in the gesture felt more intimate than any touch they had shared before. The villagers' murmurs grew to a buzz of shock as he positioned himself beside her. Elder Joran stepped forward, his face flushed with indignation. "This defies our customs, Holt. You were not raised in our ways." "I know enough," Garrick interrupted, a boldness in his tone that Elara had never heard before. "I know that worth isn't measured by beauty alone." Several of the women who had mocked Elara now averted their eyes, uncomfortable with this challenge to their cruelty. Thane watched from the edge of the gathering, his blacksmith's arms crossed tightly over his chest. As they walked together toward the blessing circle, Elara felt something shift inside her. Not just relief, but a flicker of pride. For the first time since the spring mating dance, she held her head high. Walking beside the man who saw her when no one else would, the forge blazed with unusual intensity that afternoon, its heat rippling through the air as Thane Blackwood hammered a glowing piece of metal with controlled fury. His muscles flexed with each strike, sweat glistening on his brow, as villagers gathered to watch the spectacle. But it wasn't his craftsmanship drawing the crowd today. It was the bitter words he hurled into the open air when Garrick Holt approached. "You think you're worthy of her?" Thane called out, his voice carrying over the ring of metal. The blacksmith thrust his hammer skyward, addressing the growing audience. "This mountain man who barely speaks to anyone dares to court Elara when men with actual standing in Hollowmere wouldn't?" Garrick stood silent, his tall frame rigid with discomfort as all eyes turned to him. The beekeeper had come to commission a new knife for his mountain work, not to face public humiliation. "I challenge you," Thane continued, his jealousy burning hotter than his forge. "A contest of skill between men. The village can judge who truly deserves her hand, a respected craftsman or a hermit who talks to bees." Murmurs rippled through the gathering crowd. Such challenges weren't common in Hollowmere, but they weren't unheard of either. The smith's words hung in the air, demanding response. "I accept," Garrick finally said, his voice low but firm. He understood what this meant. His private feelings for Elara would become public spectacle. His skills measured against a master craftsman. Yet refusing would only confirm what the village already believed, that he wasn't worthy. As the details of the contest were arranged, Marin slipped away from the crowd, circling behind the smithy where Thane retreated to cool his anger. Her eyes darted nervously before she approached him. "You must win," she whispered urgently, grabbing his arm. "My sister cannot be paired with that mountain dweller. Our family has little enough standing as it is." Thane studied her face, recognizing the same hunger for position that drove his own actions. "I'll win," he assured her, covering her hand with his calloused palm. "And when I do, perhaps you'll remember who restored your family's honor." Marin nodded quickly, her ambitions transparent in her eager eyes. "Just make sure he's humiliated enough that he never comes down from that mountain again." Neither noticed Breda watching from the shadows, the healer's knowing gaze taking in their conspiracy with quiet disappointment. As the village dispersed, discussing the coming contest with excitement, Garrick walked alone toward the mountain trail, his thoughts fixed on Elara and the challenge that would determine whether his heart would be validated or broken before all of Hollowmere. The ring of hammer on anvil echoed through Hollowmere, drawing villagers from their homes like moths to flame. The forge blazed with an almost supernatural heat as Garrick Holt and Thane stood facing each other. their shadows dancing against the stone walls. Sweat already glistened on their brows before the first strike, the contest between Mountain Man and Blacksmith becoming the village's most anticipated spectacle in years. "Begin," Elder Joran announced, his voice carrying authority despite his reluctance to sanction this challenge. Thane moved with practiced precision, his muscular arms flexing as he heated his metal to perfection. The blacksmith had spent his life at the forge, and it showed in every confident swing. His piece, a delicate brooch with intricate swirls, took shape with remarkable speed. Occasionally, he would glance toward the crowd, ensuring they witnessed his mastery. Garrick worked differently. The Mountain Man's movements were less polished, but carried a deliberate intensity. He seemed oblivious to the whispers around him, focused entirely on the metal beneath his hammer. While Thane crafted beauty for display, Garrick shaped something born of deeper purpose. Ilara stood at the edge of the gathering, her fingers twisting nervously in her apron. Bretta appeared beside her, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "He fights for more than pride," the healer whispered. Hours passed. Children grew restless and were hushed by parents unwilling to miss a moment. Even Marin watched with undisguised interest, her loyalties visibly torn between village status and her sister's happiness. When the final hammer fell, silence descended. Thane presented his creation first, a flawless ornamental piece that drew appreciative murmurs from the crowd. His craftsmanship was undeniable. The metal worked with expertise that spoke of years mastering his trade. Then Garrick stepped forward, offering his work with trembling hands. Where Thane had created decorative beauty, the Mountain Man had forged a pendant bearing the image of a bee in flight. Though less technically perfect, it carried something the blacksmith's work lacked: soul. Each hammer strike had been guided by thoughts of Ilara, of her resilience and quiet strength. "I see no clear victor," Elder Joran declared after examining both pieces. "Thane's skill is evident, but Garrick's heart shows through his work." The crowd dispersed slowly, conversations buzzing with new perspectives. For the first time, villagers spoke of Garrick with something approaching respect. They had come expecting to witness his humiliation, but left questioning their assumptions about the quiet man from the mountain. As the forge fires dimmed, Ilara approached Garrick and gently took the bee pendant from his calloused hands. "No matter what they decide," she said softly, "you've already won." The first snowfall came with little warning, blanketing the mountain in pristine white. By morning, the path to Hollowmere had disappeared entirely, leaving Ilara and Garrick Holt stranded in his humble dwelling. What had begun as a visit to collect pine resin became an unexpected confinement that would stretch for weeks. "The pass won't clear until the thaw," Garrick explained, stoking the hearth fire higher as wind howled outside. "You're safe here, though." His voice carried no disappointment at their predicament, only a gentle reassurance. Ilara nodded, watching snowflakes dance beyond the small window. Being cut off from the village meant freedom from judging eyes, yet isolation with this man brought its own anxieties. The Mountain Man moved about his home with practiced efficiency, arranging extra furs near the fire and hanging herbs to dry from the rafters. Days blurred together as winter deepened. They fell into simple rhythms, Garrick chopping wood before dawn, Ilara preparing meals from stored provisions. The hut, though small, offered surprising comforts: shelves of dried herbs, jars of precious honey, and walls lined with pelts that kept the bitter cold at bay. During the winter hearth gathering, a tradition Garrick observed even in solitude, they sat cross-legged before the fire, sharing cups of pine needle tea sweetened with his bee's honey. In the village, Ilara began hesitantly. "They say the winter hearth demands truth from those who gather around it." Garrick's eyes reflected the dancing flames. "My father taught me the same." A silence stretched between them, comfortable yet charged with unspoken thoughts. Finally, he spoke again, voice barely audible above the crackling fire. I've never known how to speak to people. Words tangle in my throat when others are near. His calloused fingers fidgeted with a loose thread on his sleeve. That day at the dance, I feared my voice would fail me entirely. Ilara studied his face, seeing vulnerability beneath his strength. Why did you ask me then? When it terrified you so? Because your eyes, he whispered, held the same loneliness as mine. The confession hung in the smoky air between them. Emboldened by his honesty, Ilara revealed her deepest fear, not of being considered plain, but of living a life where no one truly saw her worth beyond appearance. I don't fear being alone, she admitted. I fear being surrounded by people yet remaining unseen. As snow piled higher outside, something delicate grew within the hut's walls. Each evening brought new confessions. Garrick's childhood spent learning mountain ways after his parents' death, Ilara's strained relationship with Marin, their shared dreams of dignity rather than mere acceptance. The isolation that might have been their prison instead became sacred ground where truth could finally take root between them. The blizzard came without warning, howling down from the peaks like a vengeful spirit. Snow piled against the walls of Garrick's mountain hut, and the wind found every crack and crevice, sending cold fingers through the wooden beams. Inside, the hearth struggled against the chill, casting flickering shadows across the furs and simple tools that made up Garrick Holt's world. It was on the second night of the storm that Ilara noticed something wrong. The mountain man's normally ruddy complexion had turned ashen, his forehead burning beneath her palm. Fever had taken hold, swift and merciless. "You're burning up," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the storm's rage. Garrick tried to wave away her concern, but his strength failed him. He collapsed back onto his bed of furs, shivering violently despite the sweat beading on his brow. Ilara moved with quiet determination. She stoked the fire higher, melted snow for fresh water, and searched through her bundle for the herbs Breda had taught her to recognize. The healer's voice seemed to echo in her mind. Feverfew for the heat, willow bark for the pain, and elderberry to strengthen the blood. Through the night, she bathed his forehead with cool cloths and coaxed broth between his cracked lips. When delirium took him, Garrick called out names she didn't recognize, perhaps family long gone, or friends who had abandoned him to his solitude. "Don't leave," he mumbled, gripping her hand with surprising strength. "Everyone leaves the mountain." "I'm here," she assured him, squeezing back. "I won't go." The blizzard raged for 3 more days. 3 days of Ilara sleeping in snatches, of melting snow for water, of feeding the fire until her hands cracked from the heat and cold. 3 days of watching Garrick thrash and moan, his powerful body rendered helpless by the fever that consumed him. On the 4th morning, when the storm finally broke and sunlight streamed through the small window, Ilara had nearly collapsed from exhaustion. Her hair hung in limp strands, her eyes hollow from sleeplessness. Yet still she sat beside him, grinding herbs with a stone mortar she'd found among his possessions. "You're still here?" came a weak voice. She looked up to find his eyes open, clear for the first time in days. The fever had broken. "Where else would I be?" she asked simply. Garrick studied her face, taking in the dark circles under her eyes, the chapped lips, the determined set of her jaw. In that moment, he saw not the plain girl the village had mocked, but something far more beautiful, unwavering strength and devotion that no storm could shake. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice rough from disuse. Ilara smiled, a genuine smile that transformed her tired face. "Rest now," she said, taking his hand. "The worst has passed." The mountain hut settled into a peaceful quiet as Garrick Holt's fever finally broke. Embers glowed in the hearth, casting soft shadows across the wooden walls lined with furs. Outside, the winter winds had calmed, leaving only the occasional creak of snow-laden branches against the roof. Ilara sat beside him on a low stool, her eyes heavy from days without proper rest. She wrung out a cloth in a basin of cool water, the gentle splash breaking the silence between them. You stayed, Garrick whispered, his voice still rough from illness. The whole time. She nodded, placing the damp cloth on his forehead one last time. I couldn't leave you to face this alone. In the stillness that followed, something shifted between them, a wall crumbling after withstanding too many storms. Garrick's calloused fingers reached for hers, trembling slightly as they made contact. I should tell you something, he said, eyes fixed on their joined hands. Before you, I've never held a woman's hand like this. Not in tenderness. His face flushed, not from fever, but from the shame of his confession. The men in the village, they mock me for it. The virgin mountain man, they call me. As if my inexperience makes me less worthy. Elara's thumb traced gentle circles on his palm. The mountain man's admission hung in the air between them, raw and honest. And I should tell you, she replied, her voice barely above a whisper, that what I've wanted most was never beauty. The village sees only what I lack. They always have. She paused, gathering courage. What I've longed for is dignity. To be seen as worthy of respect, of kindness, of love. Garrick sat up slowly, his strength returning. I see you, Elara. I've always seen you, and I see you, she answered, her eyes meeting his without hesitation. Not as the others do. The healer's apprentice had once told her that truth shared was a medicine of its own. Now, in the quiet of the mountain hut, Elara understood what Breda meant. Their confessions had cleared away the last barriers between them, leaving nothing but honesty in their wake. Garrick reached for the pot of tea, adding a spoonful of wild honey, the gift of his beloved bees. He poured 2 cups, his hands steadier now. To dignity, he said, offering her the warm vessel. And to being seen, she replied, accepting both the cup and what it represented. They drank in companionable silence, 2 souls finally laid bare before each other, finding in vulnerability what neither had found in the approval of Hollowmere, a home. The last of winter's grip loosened on Hollowmere as villagers gathered for the final hearth gathering before spring. Elara and Garrick sat close together near the communal fire, their shoulders touching in a comfortable familiarity that had grown through the cold months. The flames cast dancing shadows across faces both familiar and once hostile, now softened by shared stories and mulled cider. Old Greta shuffled into the circle, her wrinkled hands clutching a worn leather-bound book. The storyteller's arrival hushed the murmurs instantly. Her tales were rare treasures, preserved through generations of Hollowmere's history. Tonight, something in her roomy eyes sparkled with purpose as she settled onto the wooden stool reserved for her alone. I've been waiting for this night, the old woman announced, her voice surprisingly strong. The signs are clear. It's time to speak of the prophecy of the wreaths. Elara felt Garrick's hand find hers in the shadows as Greta opened her ancient tome. The healer, Breda, leaned forward with unusual interest, while Elder Joran shifted uncomfortably on his bench. 300 years passed, Greta began, when Hollowmere was but 7 homes and a well. The first elder dreamed a vision that she inscribed with trembling hands. Her gnarled finger traced the faded script. The mocked maiden shall be crowned with wreaths, and the unchosen shall lead the chosen. When this comes to pass, Hollowmere will shed its old skin like a serpent in spring. A collective breath held the room still. Elara felt dozens of eyes flicker toward her before darting away. The mountain man squeezed her fingers gently. What does it mean? Someone finally whispered. Greta closed her book with deliberate care. It means that sometimes what we reject holds the key to our salvation. That beauty lies not in what we see first, but in what endures. Later, as they walked the moonlit path toward Garrick's mountain hut, Elara couldn't shake the prophecy from her thoughts. Do you think she meant us? She asked, her breath clouding in the night air. Garrick Holt considered this, his strong profile illuminated by starlight. "I don't know about prophecies," he finally said, "but I know about being unchosen until you chose me." The words settled around Ilara like a warm cloak. For the first time, she saw her rejection not as shame, but as preparation. Perhaps she had been set apart for a purpose greater than Holomir's narrow traditions could contain. In the village below, whispers of the ancient prophecy spread from hearth to hearth. Even Marin, still conflicted about her sister's path, found herself wondering if the old tales might hold truth. Thane hammered thoughtfully at his forge, the rhythm matching the words that now echoed through the valley. The mocked maiden, the unchosen one. Spring approached, and with it, the promise of new beginnings. The last of the snow retreated from the valley floor, leaving behind a carpet of tender shoots and early wildflowers. After months of isolation, Ilara and Garrick Holt descended from the mountain together, their shoulders brushing as they navigated the muddy trail down to Holomir. The winter had transformed them both, not in ways visible to the eye, but in the quiet confidence that now framed their movements. As they entered the village square, conversations faltered. Villagers who once openly mocked Ilara now studied her with uncertain glances. Something had changed in her bearing. She walked taller, her gaze steady rather than downcast. The mountain man beside her seemed different too, less awkward in his massive frame, his calloused hand occasionally finding hers without the trembling hesitation of before. "They survived the winter together," someone whispered, and the words carried notes of both surprise and reluctant admiration. Breda approached them first, her weathered face creasing into a smile as she embraced Ilara. "The mountain suits you," the healer murmured, noting the healthy flush in her cheeks that had nothing to do with cosmetics and everything to do with purpose. Even Marin, still cold with resentment, could not deny the change in her sister. She watched from the doorway of their family home as Ilara confidently traded herbs with the village women, speaking of remedies she had learned during the long winter nights. "Has she bewitched you up there?" Thane asked Garrick at the well, his tone half jest, half accusation. The craftsman simply shook his head. "She taught me to speak," he answered, words few but meaningful. Up on the mountainside, the beehives awakened with the warming days. Ilara found herself drawn to them, spending afternoons watching the industrious creatures as they rebuilt what winter had threatened. Their constant hum became the soundtrack to her days, reliable, purposeful, unceasing. "They never doubt themselves," she told Garrick one evening as they sat outside his hut, watching the last bees return home. "They just continue, no matter who watches or judges." He nodded, understanding flowing between them without need for elaborate explanation. "Like us," he replied, his rough fingers intertwining with hers. The bees' persistence mirrored their own journey, each small effort building towards something larger, each day strengthening the bond between them. What had begun as pity, then obligation, had transformed through winter's crucible into something neither had dared name yet. In the village below, Elder Joran watched the changed couple with narrowed eyes, tradition and prophecy warring in his thoughts. The spring dance would come again soon, and with it, decisions that would test the very foundations of Holomir's customs. The spring thaw had softened more than just the mountain paths. In Holomir, hearts long frozen by tradition were beginning to warm under Breda's patient influence. The healer moved through the village with purpose, stopping to speak with mothers at the well, sharing remedies with farmers in the fields, and always, always slipping in gentle words about Ilara and Garrick. "Have you noticed," she would say, grinding herbs in her mortar, "how the mountain man's eyes light up when he speaks of her? Not pity there, something truer." Or she might observe, "Ilara carried water for Widow Thorn yesterday, 6th time this month." Strange how we overlooked such kindness before. Small comments, scattered like seeds, began to take root. Villagers who once turned away when Ilara passed now offered hesitant nods. Children who had mimicked their parents' cruelty started bringing her wildflowers, fascinated by stories of Garrick's bees. The whispers changed tone, less mockery, more wonder at the unexpected bond forming between the plain village girl and the solitary craftsman. At the forge, Thane hammered metal with unusual force, each blow seeming to strike at his own conscience. The blacksmith had watched silently for months as others ridiculed Ilara, had even joined in when it served his pride. Now, seeing how Garrick stood beside her without shame, he felt the weight of his cowardice. "I finished your tools," he told Garrick one afternoon, voice gruff with unspoken apology. "No charge. Good work deserves good implements." Garrick accepted with a nod, understanding the gesture for what it was, the beginning of respect. Not everyone embraced change so readily. In her family home, Marin sat before a cracked looking-glass, pinching color into pale cheeks. Her sister's growing acceptance threatened everything she had built her identity upon. If Ilara could find happiness despite being plain, what value remained in Marin's carefully cultivated beauty? "They pity her still," she insisted to her reflection. "Nothing has changed." But when she ventured to the village square and saw Ilara helping Garrick sell honey, their easy laughter drawing a friendly crowd, doubt crept in. Status built on others. Misery suddenly seemed a poor foundation. Elder Joran remained the strongest voice of resistance, citing tradition at every council meeting. Yet even he found himself watching thoughtfully when Garrick and Ilara walked through the village, their awkward affection somehow more genuine than the practiced courtships he had blessed for decades. "Perhaps," he muttered to no one in particular, "there is something to be said for choosing with the heart rather than the eyes." The village was changing, slowly but surely, like a river gradually carving a new path through resistant stone. A full year had passed since that fateful night when Garrick Holt had stepped forward and changed both their lives forever. Now, the spring mating dance returned to Hollowmere, bringing with it memories both bitter and sweet. The village square transformed once again. Lanterns hung from branches, casting their golden glow across faces both familiar and changed by the seasons that had passed. The fiddles began their tentative warm-up, strings vibrating with anticipation as villagers gathered in their finest clothes. Young men clutched ribbons in nervous hands, while maidens whispered among themselves, eyes darting toward potential suitors. The air hummed with possibility, thick with the scent of spring blossoms and wood smoke. This time, Ilara did not skulk in the shadows. She stood tall near the center of the gathering, her simple dress adorned with a sprig of mountain lavender. The past year had not changed her outward appearance. She remained the same woman the village had once deemed unworthy, but something fundamental had shifted in her bearing. She carried herself with quiet dignity that had been forged through winter storms and summer labors. Several villagers nodded respectfully as she passed. Even Elder Joran, though his expression remained stern, did not turn away as he once might have. Bretta watched from nearby, a knowing smile playing at the corners of her lips as she observed the subtle changes in how the community regarded her former pupil. At the edge of the square, Garrick waited. The mountain man towered above most others, his broad shoulders tense beneath his best shirt, one he had clearly struggled to smooth of wrinkles. He shifted his weight from one foot to another, fingers absently tracing the rough calluses, earned from a year of shared work and growing tenderness. His heart pounded so loudly he was certain the entire village must hear it. The craftsman's eyes never left Ilara, though he acknowledged with nervous nods those who approached him with curious greetings. Even Thane, the blacksmith who had once challenged him so fiercely, offered a grudging nod of recognition from across the square. Marin stood with a cluster of village women, her expression complicated as she watched her sister. The rift between them had not fully healed, But something like respect had begun to replace her former resentment. As the music swelled and the dance prepared to begin in earnest, Garrick and Alara's eyes met across the crowd. A year of shared hardship, of learning each other's ways, of finding strength in vulnerability, all of it hung in the air between them. He swallowed hard, hope and dread battling within his chest as the moment of choice approached once more. The dance was about to begin, but this time everything was different. The lanterns swayed gently in the evening breeze as villagers gathered for the spring mating dance. Unlike last year, the atmosphere felt different, charged with anticipation rather than cruelty. Alara stood at the edge of the square, no longer shrinking into shadows. The past year had transformed her, not in appearance, but in spirit. Her eyes, once downcast, now surveyed the crowd with quiet confidence. Before the first notes of the fiddle could fill the air, Alara stepped forward into the open space. Conversation died instantly. Every face turned toward her, some curious, others wary, a few with newfound respect. In her hand, she clutched a ribbon of deep blue, the traditional symbol of choice in Holomir's courtship ritual. "What is she doing?" someone whispered. "Women don't offer ribbons first." But Alara paid no heed to the murmurs. Her gaze sought only one person among the gathered villagers. Garrick Holt stood tall yet awkward at the opposite side of the square, his broad shoulders hunched slightly as if bracing for rejection. The mountain man's eyes widened when he realized she was walking directly toward him. "A year ago," she began, her voice carrying across the suddenly silent gathering, "you stood where no one else would. You chose me when it brought you nothing but mockery." Marin watched from beside Thane, her face a mask of conflicted emotions. Elder Joran frowned deeply, his weathered hands gripping his walking stick with white knuckles. Breda, however, smiled knowingly from her place near the refreshment table. Alara continued her path across the square, each step deliberate. "In Holomir, tradition says men choose first," she said, loud enough for all to hear. "But some traditions deserve to be questioned." She stopped before Garrick, whose cheeks had flushed crimson. His hands trembled at his sides, work roughened and strong from a winter of crafting and survival. "I choose you," Alara declared, extending the ribbon. "Not from gratitude or obligation, but because I have seen your heart." Garrick's fingers shook as they closed around the offered token. The crowd held its collective breath, witnessing something unprecedented in their village's history. "I choose you," she repeated, softer now, meant only for him. Because love isn't found in perfect faces or village approval. It's found in honey-sweetened tea during blizzards, in the hum of bees that kept you company when no one else would, and in hands that tremble not from weakness, but from caring too deeply. The mountain man's eyes glistened with unshed tears as he clutched the ribbon to his chest. The silence that enveloped the square was profound, a moment when an entire community witnessed their own prejudices challenged by the courage of two outsiders who had found in each other what the village had denied them both: dignity. Old Greta's prophecy echoed through the valley as villagers gathered with wreaths woven from spring's first blooms. The words that once seemed like mere folklore now manifested before their eyes. "The mocked maiden shall be crowned with wreaths, and the unchosen shall lead the chosen." Alara stood in the center of the village square, no longer the girl who had been shunned and ridiculed. The same people who had once averted their gaze now approached her one by one, offering garlands of wildflowers. Breda was the first, her weathered hands placing a crown of white blossoms atop Alara's head with gentle reverence. "You have shown us all what true beauty means," the healer whispered, her eyes glistening with pride. Even Marin stepped forward, her fingers trembling as she added her own small wreath to her sister's crown. The gesture spoke volumes, a silent apology, a recognition of strength that transcended their differences. For the first time in years, a genuine smile passed between the siblings. Thane approached next, his broad blacksmith's shoulders hunched in humility. The man who had once challenged Garrick now bowed his head before Alara, offering a wreath adorned with tiny metal charms he had forged himself, symbols of courage and perseverance. "Forgive my blindness," he murmured, the words barely audible above the rustling leaves. Elder Joran, leaning heavily on his walking stick, made his way through the crowd. The old man's face was a map of conflicting emotions as he presented his contribution, a circle of evergreen signifying endurance. His hands shook with age and perhaps regret for the traditions he had so fiercely guarded. Throughout it all, Garrick Holt watched from the edge of the gathering, his eyes never leaving Alara. When the last wreath had been placed, he stepped forward. The mountain man knelt before her, tears streaming unashamedly down his face. His voice, once so hesitant, rang clear across the square. "You chose me when no one would choose you," he said. "And in doing so, you taught Hollowmere that love sees with the heart, not the eyes." The villagers circled around them, witnesses to a transformation more profound than the changing seasons. Children scattered flower petals at Ilara's feet, while the elders nodded in solemn acknowledgement. Old Greta smiled knowingly from her place by the lantern post, her prophecy fulfilled at last. As the sun began its descent behind the mountains, casting golden light across the valley, Hollowmere collectively understood that true worth could never be measured by appearance alone. The cycle of rejection that had defined their customs for generations had been broken, replaced by something far more enduring. The villagers of Hollowmere gathered beneath a canopy of spring blossoms, their faces alight with joy and wonder. What had begun as scandal had transformed into celebration, a testament to love's power to reshape even the most rigid traditions. Elder Joran stood at the edge of the festivities, his weathered face a map of conflicting emotions. After decades of upholding the old ways, he found himself witnessing their transformation before his very eyes. "Perhaps," he whispered to Breda as she approached, "some customs must evolve with the hearts of those who practice them." The healer nodded, her wise eyes crinkling with satisfaction. She had planted seeds of compassion throughout the village for years, and now watched them bloom in full glory. "The strongest traditions," Breda replied, "are those that bend rather than break." Across the square, Alara and Garrick moved among their neighbors, no longer outcasts, but pioneers of a new understanding. The mountain man's hand rested gently against the small of his beloved's back, his touch confident where once it had trembled. Children who had once echoed their parents' cruel whispers now approached the couple with curious smiles, offering wildflowers and shy questions about the bees that Garrick tended. Marin watched from a distance, her bitter heart slowly softening as she witnessed her sister's quiet dignity. The blacksmith stood beside her, his rivalry with Garrick transformed into grudging respect. Thane had learned that strength meant little without compassion to guide it. "Next spring," announced old Greta, her voice carrying across the gathering, "we shall begin the dance differently. Let all who wish to choose come forward with their ribbons, regardless of beauty or station." The storyteller's eyes twinkled as she added, "For we have seen that true worth lies deeper than appearance." The villagers murmured their approval, traditions reshaping themselves in real time. What had once been a ritual of humiliation for some had become a celebration of courage for all. Young men and women exchanged glances of hope, seeing possibilities where once there had been only rigid expectations. As twilight descended, Ilara and Garrick slipped away from the celebration, climbing the familiar path toward his mountain hut, their home now. Above them, the first stars appeared in the deepening blue. Around them, the steady hum of returning bees filled the air with promise. "They sound happy," Ilara said, listening to the insect's contented drone. Garrick smiled, No longer the awkward virgin who had defied an entire village, but a man transformed by love and acceptance. "They're singing for us," he replied, "for new beginnings." In the valley below, lanterns twinkled like earthbound stars, marking a village forever changed. And high on the mountain, two souls who had found dignity in each other's eyes embraced the future they had created, not just for themselves, but for all of Hollowmere.